"Dad, just sign it. It's not a big deal. We're family." That was what my daughter-in-law Celeste said to me the afternoon. She slid a folder across my kitchen table, like she was offering me a menu at a diner. She had this smile on her face. Not a warm smile. More like the kind a salesperson gives you right before they start talking numbers. My son Dale was sitting right next to her, staring at the tabletop like he'd suddenly found the wood grain fascinating. I was 64 years old. I had spent 31 years working as a structural engineer in Columbus, Ohio, raised 2 kids mostly on my own after my wife Diane passed from ovarian cancer when our youngest was still in middle school, and I had never in my life felt like a stranger at my own kitchen table. Until that afternoon, I didn't sign anything that day. I told them I needed to read it first. Celeste's smile flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. Dale still wouldn't look at me. That was 14 months before everything fell apart. Let me back up. I retired at 62, earlier than I'd planned, but my knees had started giving me real trouble, and the firm I'd been with for 2 decades was bought out by a larger company that brought in its own people. I wasn't bitter about it. Diane always said I worked too hard, and by the time I cleaned out my office, I think she would have been glad to see me slow down. I moved from our house in Bexley to a smaller place in Westerville, a nice ranch home, 3 bedrooms, good neighborhood, quiet street. I had my pension, my 401a, and the equity I'd built up over decades. Not wealthy by any stretch, but comfortable. Secure. The kind of secure that takes a lifetime to build. My son Dale was 38. He worked in sales for a logistics company. The kind of work where you're always chasing the next quarter, always a little stressed, always talking about the deal that's about to close. He'd married Celeste 6 years earlier. She was smart and pretty, and I had genuinely liked her in the beginning. She organized things, kept the house immaculate, managed their finances. I thought Dale had done well for himself. Their son Owen was 4 years old, and the best thing in my life. Round little face, dark eyes that reminded me of Diane, this enormous laugh that seemed too big for his body. I watched him 2 days a week, sometimes 3. I drove him to preschool on Tuesdays. We built train tracks on my living room floor, and I read him the same 3 books over and over, because he always wanted the same ones. He called me Pop, and I cannot tell you what that did to me every single time. My daughter Irene lived out in Portland. We talked on the phone every Sunday, and she visited when she could. But her life was there, her job, her husband, her friends. We were close in the way you can be close across 2,000 miles. I missed her, but I understood. It was about 8 months after I retired that Dale and Celeste started coming around more. At first, I was glad. Owen was getting bigger, getting funnier, and I welcomed every excuse to see him. But I started to notice that most of their visits ended with some version of a request. Could I lend them money for a new car because their lease was up and the payments were killing them? Could I help with Owen's preschool tuition this semester because things were tight? Could I co-sign on a home equity line because their credit had taken a hit after Dale switched jobs? I said yes to some of it. I'm not proud of how long it took me to start saying no. The folder Celeste slid across my table that afternoon contained a durable power of attorney. She had already had it drawn up by someone. I didn't recognize the attorney's name. Wasn't anyone I knew. It gave Dale authority to manage my financial accounts, make real estate decisions on my behalf, and handle medical decisions if I became incapacitated. She framed it as practical. Sensible. You're on your own out here, Dad. God forbid something happened to you, and nobody could access your accounts to help. I told them I needed time to look it over. What I didn't tell them was that I'd had my own estate attorney for 15 years. His name was Howard Kessler, and he'd handled Diane's will, our living trusts, everything. I called Howard the next morning. He looked over the document and called me back that same afternoon. His voice was careful in the way that told me he was choosing his words. "This is broader than anything you'd typically want to grant a family member," he said. "Particularly the financial provisions. This would give Dale essentially full access to your accounts and the ability to sell or refinance your property without your direct involvement." I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. I didn't sign it. When Dale called 2 days later to ask if I'd looked it over, I told him I had some questions and wanted to talk to my own attorney first. There was a pause on the line that lasted maybe 3 seconds too long. "Of course," he said. No rush. But after that, things changed. The visits became less frequent. When they did come, Celeste was pleasant in a way that felt performed, like she was going through motions. Dale was distracted, always on his phone. Owen still climbed into my lap and demanded I read him his books, still called me Pop, still laughed that enormous laugh. But I could feel something cooling around the edges of the family I thought I had. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then my brother Raymond died. Raymond was 69. He'd had heart trouble for years, the kind that runs in families and makes you watch your own chest a little more carefully. He had a massive heart attack on a Wednesday morning in March, sitting in his favorite chair in his house in Dayton, and by Thursday evening he was gone. Just like that. 69 years old and gone, and I had spent those 69 years knowing he was in the world. Raymond was the one who taught me to drive. He was at my wedding. He was in the waiting room the night Diane's cancer diagnosis came back. He was one of the people who helped me figure out how to be a father after she died, because he had his own kids and he'd make the drive from Dayton just to sit with me on my porch and not say much of anything, but be there. That's the kind of man he was. His funeral was set for that Sunday. I called Dale on Thursday, the same day Raymond passed, to let him know. I wasn't asking for anything. I just wanted my son to know his uncle was gone and that I'd need to be in Dayton on Sunday. Owen was supposed to come to me on Saturday, their regular overnight, before I dropped him at preschool Monday morning. Celeste answered. "Oh, I'm so sorry about Raymond," she said, and she did sound sorry briefly. "But Dale and I already have plans for this weekend. We have a trip." I thought I'd misheard her. A trip, we've had it planned for a while. A long weekend. Dale really needs to decompress. I remember standing in my kitchen holding the phone and looking out the window at my backyard, at the bird feeder I'd put up because Owen liked to watch the cardinals, and thinking, she is not going to tell me she can't change a vacation because my brother just died. But that is exactly what she told me. "Can't you make other arrangements for Owen?" she asked. "He adores you. It would be fine." "Celeste," I said, as evenly as I could. "My brother died 2 days ago. His funeral is Sunday. I need to be there. I understand that, I do. But we've had this booked for months. The deposits are non-refundable." I asked to speak to Dale. She said he was in the shower. I said I'd wait. She said she'd have him call me back. He didn't call back that night. He called the next morning. I could tell from the first 5 seconds that Celeste had already told him what to say. "Dad, I know this is really hard," he started. "And I'm so sorry about Uncle Raymond. I really am. But this trip was supposed to be our anniversary trip, and Celeste has been really looking forward to it, and we've already got the hotel and everything." "Dale," I said, "I'm going to your uncle's funeral on Sunday. Can you find someone else to watch Owen? He's 4 years old, Dad. He can't just go to a stranger's. He's not going to a stranger's. He'd be with you. You could bring him to the funeral. Kids go to funerals." Another silence. Longer. "Celeste doesn't think that's appropriate for Owen." "Celeste," I said, and I had to stop and breathe, "is not the one who lost a brother." There was a long pause, and then Dale said something that I have thought about almost every day since. He said quietly, almost like he was reciting something, "Dad, Raymond was sick for a long time. You knew this was coming. Our anniversary only happens once a year." I hung up. I drove to Dayton on Saturday afternoon, stayed at my nephew's place, and was at Raymond's funeral on Sunday morning. I sat in that church and said goodbye to my brother properly, the way he deserved. I cried, and his wife Olive held my hand during the service. And afterward, we went back to her house and ate the food that the neighbors had brought and told stories about Raymond until it started to get dark. Nobody watched Owen that weekend. Dale and Celeste took him with them on their trip after all. I found this out 3 weeks later from something Owen said, something about a hotel with a big pool and a mountain he saw from the window. They'd been in Colorado, skiing. They hadn't canceled the trip. They just found a way to take Owen along and told me they couldn't. I want to be very clear about something. I understood, even then, that I might have been able to bring Owen to that funeral. Maybe I should have offered that more firmly. Maybe I was too rigid in the moment. But they had used Raymond's death as a negotiating chip, and they had lied to me about what they were doing that weekend, and something about that changed my understanding of who I was dealing with. I started paying closer attention. I noticed that Dale had stopped mentioning work. For 2 years, he'd barely been able to get through a phone call without talking about quotas and territories and his regional manager. Now, nothing. When I asked, he was vague. "It's fine, Dad. Things are good." But Celeste had new furniture in the living room, a new car in the driveway, a new watch on Dale's wrist that I recognized as a brand I couldn't have afforded at the height of my career. I called Howard Kessler again. Not about anything specific, just to talk through some things. He listened and then said something I've never forgotten. When someone tries to get broad financial access to your life, and you say no, then suddenly they start living beyond their means. It's worth wondering where the money is coming from. I started pulling my own records, account statements going back 2 years, property records. I have a methodical mind. It comes with the engineering, and I am very good at organizing information. What I found took my breath away. 18 months earlier, while I was still in the early fog of retirement, I had granted Dale a limited power of attorney. Not the broad one. Celeste tried to get me to sign at the kitchen table, but an earlier, more limited document I'd put in place as a temporary measure during a knee surgery. It was supposed to be narrow, time-limited, for handling one specific insurance matter. Howard had drafted it, and Howard had flagged a termination date. Except someone had modified the document. The termination language was gone, and in the 14 months since, Dale had used that document to open a home equity line of credit against my Westerville house, $310,000, and another $95,000 in withdrawals from a brokerage account I rarely checked. Over $400,000. I had to read the documents 3 times before I let myself believe what I was reading. I called Howard and asked him to come to my house. He came that afternoon. We laid everything out on my dining room table and went through it for 3 hours. The modified document had been submitted to the bank with what appeared to be my notarized signature. The notarization was fraudulent. Someone had forged it. The bank had approved the HELOC without ever calling me directly. The brokerage withdrawals had come through a wire authorization form that I had never signed. "How does something like this happen?" I asked Howard. "How does a bank approve a home equity line without speaking to the actual owner?" "It shouldn't," he said. "And we're going to make sure they answer for that. But right now, the more urgent question is what you want to do." I want to explain what I was feeling in that moment, because I think it matters. I wasn't panicking. I was something quieter than that, something colder. I had built a house. I had raised children. I had buried a wife and a brother. I understood by then that some damage is permanent and some is not, and the first thing you do is figure out which kind you're dealing with. This kind, with Howard's help, was not permanent, because 3 months earlier, before I'd found any of this, but after the Sunday Raymond died, I had done something on instinct. I had revoked the limited power of attorney entirely. Not the broad one Celeste wanted me to sign. That one I'd never signed. The limited one, the one from my knee surgery. I'd driven to Howard's office on a Tuesday afternoon and signed a revocation and filed it with the county recorder's office. I hadn't said a word to Dale or Celeste about it, which meant that every transaction Dale had executed in the past 3 months was done under a document that no longer had legal force. Howard looked at me when I told him this, and his expression was something I'd never quite seen on his face before. "You have very good instincts," he said. We spent the next 2 weeks building the case carefully. Howard connected me with a forensic accountant and a criminal defense attorney who had experience on the victim side of financial fraud cases. We worked quietly. I did not contact Dale. I did not let on that I knew anything. When Celeste called to invite me to Owen's birthday party, I said of course I'd be there. And I went, and I watched Dale across the room with new eyes, and I felt something I can only describe as grief, wearing the face of clarity. Owen blew out 4 candles. He'd turned 5, and ran to me with a piece of cake and said, "Pop, I saved you the piece with the most frosting," and I held it together. Howard filed the police report on a Thursday in May. The detectives moved faster than I expected, I think because the documentary evidence was so clean, so organized. The modified notarization was traceable. The wire authorization forms had fingerprints. The bank's own internal records showed the approval chain in a way that would make them liable. Dale was arrested on a Friday morning at his office. I know because his assistant called me, confused and frightened, not knowing who else to reach. I drove to the station. Not to help Dale, but because I needed to be present. Because some things you have to witness. Celeste was arrested the following Tuesday. I won't say I took satisfaction in it. I took something more complicated than that. The particular exhaustion of being right about something you prayed you were wrong about. The bank settled out of court for the full $310,000, acknowledging failures in their verification process. The brokerage recovered most of the $95,000 through the fraudulent wire claim. Howard tells me I will likely see most of that money restored. The criminal charges, wire fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, are still working through the courts as of now. Dale's attorney has indicated he will cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. I don't know yet what that will look like. What I know is that my house is mine. My accounts are mine. My retirement, the thing I spent 31 years building, belongs to me. Irene flew in from Portland 2 days after Dale's arrest. She sat at my kitchen table and cried in a way she hadn't since Diane died, and I sat next to her and didn't say much, because some things don't have the right words. She wanted to apologize, I think, as if she should have seen it coming and protected me. I told her that wasn't her job, that it wasn't anyone's job but the people who chose to do what they did. Owen is with Celeste's parents right now, in Michigan, while everything gets sorted out. I have spoken with a family attorney about my rights as a grandparent in Ohio, and Howard tells me the path to maintaining a relationship with him is real, even if it will take time and patience. Every Tuesday I still feel the absence of it, the drive to preschool, the train tracks on the living room floor, the books we read over and over. I keep the bird feeder filled, even though he isn't here to watch the Cardinals with me. Maybe that's sentimental. Maybe it's just how I know to hold on to something while I wait. Raymond used to say that the people who take from you are usually afraid of you in some way. That they wouldn't need what's yours if they weren't scared of what they couldn't build themselves. I've thought about that a lot since all of this. I don't know if it makes me feel better or worse about Dale. Maybe it doesn't have to do either. What I know is this: I spent 31 years building something real. I said no to a document I didn't trust. I paid attention when my instincts told me to. I made a quiet Tuesday afternoon visit to Howard Kessler's office that turned out to be the most important thing I did in the past 2 years, and I was at my brother's funeral. On time. In the front row where I belonged. Raymond would have had something dry and funny to say about all of it. That's the thing about losing someone who knew you your whole life. You keep writing their lines in your head long after they're gone. I think he would have said something like, "You always were the careful one." I could never figure out if that was a compliment. It was, Raymond. It was.